December 1944. The pre-dawn darkness gripped the German-Belgian border near Monschau. Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson gripped his field glasses tighter. The classified ammunition crates stared back at him in the gloom. His next choice would shatter every standing order from Allied high command. Through the lenses, he watched German forces gathering. This would become Hitler's final desperate gamble in the West. Operation Watch on the Rhine was about to begin. The northern shoulder defenders were doomed. The 38th Cavalry Squadron couldn't hold much longer. What history would name the Battle of the Bulge was starting badly for American forces. His operations officer approached with grim news. German artillery preparation was underway. The 38th needed fire support immediately. They needed it now. Axelson's eyes fell on those special shell markings. T-98 posit designation gleamed in the dim light. Proximity-fused rounds that carried strict land use prohibitions. The technology was so classified that most American commanders had never heard of it. These shells held miniaturized radio transmitters inside. They would detonate precisely 30 feet above ground level. The lethal fragment cone made traditional foxholes completely worthless as protection. Load the VT shells. The colonel's voice was steady. VT stood for variable time. Enemy intelligence would never understand the code name. They needed every advantage available. 47 minutes would pass before history changed forever. Axelson's unauthorized decision was about to introduce German ground forces to impossible technology. Technology that would reshape the war's final months completely. The shells contained sophistication beyond German scientific understanding. German scientists had declared such devices physically impossible to create. Each shell represented American manufacturing supremacy. The true gap between American capability and German assumptions was enormous. Death's mathematics were about to be completely rewritten. Every shell would air burst at approximately 30 feet altitude. Supersonic steel fragments would travel at 3,000 feet per second. A 60-yard radius would be carpeted with lethal metal rain. No amount of digging could help. No foxhole depth would matter. No overhead cover constructible under combat conditions would provide protection. This metal storm from above made earthworks obsolete instantly. The proximity fuse ranked third among World War II's most important technological developments. Only radar and atomic weapons surpassed its significance. Official U.S. military assessments confirmed this ranking repeatedly. Yet German forces had no knowledge of its existence until fragments began killing them. The device concept was elegantly simple. Its execution was impossibly complex. A miniature radio transmitter and receiver fit inside an artillery shell nose. It survived acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity. It detected distance from ground and detonated at optimal killing height. Each fuse contained exactly 4 vacuum tubes, not 5, as sometimes incorrectly reported. They formed a complete radio station compressed smaller than a coffee cup. They were hardened to withstand forces that would liquefy human tissue completely. Development had begun in 1940. The program consumed $1 billion in 1940 dollars. That equals approximately $15 billion in current values. By late 1943, American factories produced 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Production eventually reached 70,000 per day by war's end. British scientists called it warfare's most remarkable scientific achievement. Production statistics revealed complete American industrial supremacy. Exactly 22,134,181 proximity fuses were manufactured between 1942 and 1945. Of these, 21,685,157 shipped for combat use. Another 388,324 went to testing programs. Each fuse contained approximately 130 components. Manufacturing tolerances reached 1/10,000th of an inch precision. Assembly occurred in clean rooms. 110,000 workers built them without knowing their purpose. The power problem required ingenious solutions. A wind-driven generator activated only after shell firing. A small propeller stayed protected during acceleration forces. It extended into the slipstream to generate electricity. Capacitors powered the radio circuit operating at 180 to 220 megahertz. This design meant complete inertness until firing occurred. Safe handling was guaranteed. Detection was impossible. Jamming was ineffective until final flight seconds. The fuse remained completely dormant during storage and transport. The first massive ground deployment began at 618 hours on December 16, 1944, precisely 47 minutes after German offensive commencement. Colonel Axelson's 406th Artillery Group fired without any official authorization. They responded to immediate tactical crisis needs. General Eisenhower wouldn't formally request clearance until December 19th. All restrictions lifted by December 24th. The effect was immediate and absolutely devastating. German soldiers advanced in pre-dawn darkness as planned. They dove for prepared foxholes when American artillery began firing, standard procedure executed countless times before. But shells exploded in air above them instead of impacting ground. Fragments came straight down at angles rendering foxholes useless. The 99th Infantry Division's after-action report documented the horrific effects clearly. VT fused concentrations on German assembly areas near Krinkelt resulted in extraordinary casualties. Lead battalions suffered massive losses within 12 minutes of fire mission commencement. Enemy medical services became completely overwhelmed. Advancing units stepped over their own dead to continue attacks. By December 23rd, military intelligence estimated 2,000 German soldiers killed by proximity-fused rounds. The fighting around Malmedy saw artillery battalions firing to devastating effect against SS forces. Some attackers became so unnerved they charged directly into artillery fire, screaming, "Kamerad!" The psychological impact exceeded even the massive physical devastation. Understanding why proximity fuses rendered defensive positions obsolete requires understanding airburst physics. Standard high-explosive shells detonating on ground contact send 50% of fragments into Earth. 45% travel outward horizontally, and only 5% go upward. Soldiers in properly constructed foxholes had 90% survival chances from conventional artillery. Proximity fuses changed these survival mathematics catastrophically. Detonating at 30 feet altitude meant 100% of fragments traveled downward or outward. The inverted cone pattern was perfectly lethal. Lethal radius increased from 25 yards for ground burst to 60 yards for air burst. Fragments arrived at 30-45-degree angles perfectly aligned to enter foxholes, trenches, and rifle pits. Lethal fragment area increased from 60 square feet with conventional fuses to 3,000 square feet. A 50-fold improvement made traditional field fortifications largely ineffective. This wasn't incremental artillery improvement. It was fundamental transformation of how artillery could be employed against infantry. The shells became monuments to American precision manufacturing excellence. Miniaturized components had to function after experiencing forces that destroyed conventional electronics. The 4 vacuum tubes were specially hardened versions bearing no resemblance to commercial counterparts. A triode for oscillator detector functions, a pentode for amplification, a thyrotron as trigger switch, occasionally a diode for rectification. Proximity fuse development represented American scientific-industrial cooperation at absolute peak performance. August 1940, the British Tizard mission shared military secrets with America. Early radar work and theoretical proximity fuse concepts were included. British scientists proved the theory, but lacked industrial capacity for development and mass production. The National Defense Research Committee formed June 1940. They made proximity fuses their second priority after radar development. Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory became the development center. American industry tooled up for massive production simultaneously. The challenges were absolutely staggering. Fuses had to withstand 20,000 GTDs of acceleration, function in temperatures from -50 to +120 degrees Fahrenheit, spin up to 30,000 RPM, operate reliably after months of storage. Conditions ranged from humid Pacific islands to frozen European depots. Section T was the Proximity Fuse Project code name. It employed 3,000 scientists and engineers at peak operation. They developed new plastics that wouldn't shatter under acceleration. Miniature vacuum tubes withstood forces, destroying normal electronics. Assembly techniques achieved accuracy measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The first successful test occurred January 29, 1942. A proximity-fused shell destroyed a drone aircraft over Chesapeake Bay. By August 1942, the USS Cleveland was equipped with proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells. Results were absolutely spectacular. Japanese aircraft kills increased dramatically overnight. The USS Helena made history January 5, 1943. They shot down a Japanese dive bomber off Guadalcanal using only 4 proximity-fused shells. But technology was deemed too secret for overland use, where enemies might recover unexploded shells. This restriction held until German Ardennes offensive threatened to split Allied forces. Field commanders like Colonel Axelson made unauthorized decisions that proved strategically correct. Before ground deployment, proximity fuses had already proven revolutionary in naval warfare. Operating at sea eliminated enemy capture risks. This allowed unrestricted use against Japanese aircraft. Statistics were absolutely compelling. Ships using proximity fuses required average 310 rounds per aircraft kill. Conventional ammunition required 1,162 rounds per kill. By 1944, proximity-fused shells accounted for 25% of ammunition fired, but they achieved 51% of aircraft destroyed. During June 1944, Battle of Philippine Sea proximity fuses helped create the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese aircraft losses exceeded 400 planes. Technology that would devastate German infantry was perfected against Japanese pilots. British began using proximity fuses against V-1 flying bombs June 12, 1944, just days after D-Day commenced. Anti-aircraft batteries along English coast increased kill rates from 17% to 79% within 4 weeks. General Frederick Pyle, commander of Anti-Aircraft Command, called it the most remarkable scientific achievement in warfare history. These successes made ground use restrictions increasingly difficult to maintain. Field commanders knew the technology existed. They grew frustrated watching infantry take casualties proximity fuses could prevent. Battle of the Bulge crisis finally broke this bureaucratic logjam. German intelligence had actually received proximity fuse warnings. October 1944. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring's staff noticed dramatic Luftwaffe loss increases to Allied anti-aircraft fire. They recovered metal fragments with unusual scoring patterns suggesting air-burst detonation. Kesselring's report to OKW Oberkommando der Wehrmacht stated clearly, "Evidence suggests Americans possess altitude-triggered ammunition. If adapted to ground artillery effects on infantry, would be catastrophic. Recommend immediate investigation of countermeasures." Berlin's response, found in captured archives, dismissed his concerns completely. Technical evaluation concludes proximity detonation under battlefield conditions impossible. American anti-aircraft improvements attributed to radar direction and increased gun density. No action required. This dismissal would cost Wehrmacht forces dearly. German scientists had actually attempted proximity fuse development since early 1930s. They created 30 to 50 different designs. Acoustic fuses triggered by engine sound. Electrostatic field devices. Radio-based systems. None reached operational status. Hitler's 1940 directive terminated all development that couldn't reach production within 6 months. This effectively killed their proximity fuse program completely. The irony was absolutely profound. During Battle of the Bulge, German forces captured approximately 20,000 proximity fuses. They never recognized what they possessed. German engineers had concluded such technology was impossible due to massive acceleration forces during firing. They literally held the intelligence coup of the war without realizing it. 5 American companies conducted final proximity fuse assembly. Crossley Corporation produced 5.2 million units. Sylvania manufactured $5.7 million. RCA at 2 plants combined for $5.9 million. Eastman Kodak contributed $2.4 million. McQueen Norris added $2.9 million. Sylvania's Ipswich, Massachusetts plant was the single highest producing location. It accounted for 26% of total production output. Crossley Corporation's Cincinnati plant employed 8,000 workers. They produced up to 16,500 proximity fuses daily at peak production levels. Their quality control detected defects measuring 1/50,000th of an inch. The plant consumed more electricity daily than entire German cities. Air conditioning maintained temperature within 2 degrees to prevent thermal expansion affecting tolerances. Quality control rejected 28% of completed units, failing to meet specifications. This rejection rate would have been catastrophic in German production systems. It was acceptable to American planners because production volume was absolutely massive. They could afford destroying more precision components daily than Germany produced monthly. Sylvania dominated component manufacturing completely. They produced 95% of miniature vacuum tubes, over 100 million total, employing 10,000 workers across 15 plants dedicated solely to VT program operations. Over 100 American companies participated across the complete supply chain. More than 2,000 suppliers ranged from powder manufacturers to precision machine shops. The workforce was predominantly female throughout the system. At Sylvania's Ipswich plant, 9,000 of 10,000 workers were women. Many were recruited from local communities. They worked in clean rooms with filtered air systems. They used microscopes to verify component placement with tolerances of 1/2000th of an inch. Each worker typically performed one specific task, repeated thousands of times per shift. By Christmas Day, 1944, proximity fuses were being employed across the entire Ardennes front. The U.S. Army fired 200,000 proximity-fused shells during Battle of the Bulge. General Patton, initially skeptical of new technology, became a complete convert after witnessing its devastating effectiveness. December 25 to 26, Patton's Third Army reported killing approximately 700 Germans by actual count at Echternach. They used proximity-fused artillery exclusively. His famous assessment was the funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. This from a commander who had previously favored tanks and mobile warfare over artillery support. The psychological impact on German forces was documented through extensive prisoner interrogations. Captured soldiers repeatedly described feeling completely helpless against artillery that exploded overhead consistently. Traditional defensive training emphasized taking cover in depressions, foxholes, or trenches. Proximity fuses made these positions death traps rather than protective shelters. One captured German officer told interrogators, your shells explode exactly at treetop height. Always the same height. We tried everything. Deeper holes, concrete covers, dispersal. Nothing worked against them. The consistency of 30-foot detonation height achieved through precise radio measurement created predictability that was paradoxically more terrifying than random impacts. Soldiers knew exactly where death would come from, but couldn't defend against it. The Hurtgen Forest battle had raged since September 1944. It transformed when proximity fuses were authorized for use December 18th. Dense forest that had provided German defenders with concealment and overhead cover became a multiplier for proximity-fused effectiveness. Tree bursts had always been deadly, but were difficult to achieve deliberately with time-fused shells. Proximity fuses detonated consistently at optimal height, whether over open ground or forest canopy. The combination of steel fragments and wood splinters created lethal storms that no field fortification could withstand. The 4th Infantry Division's artillery fired 12,000 proximity-fused rounds in the first 48 hours after authorization. The division's after-action report noted dramatic increases in enemy casualties and corresponding decreases in German defensive effectiveness. Medical stations reported wound patterns they hadn't seen before. Deep puncture wounds from above concentrated on shoulders and heads. This battle became a grim laboratory for understanding proximity-fused effects on human bodies. Artillery observers noted that German soldiers stopped using foxholes. They sought overhead cover in bunkers and buildings instead. This forced them into concentrated positions that became targets for conventional high-explosive shells. It created tactical dilemmas with no good solutions. Operation Grenade, the Allied offensive to reach the Rhine, began February 23, 1945. The Ninth Army fired hundreds of thousands of proximity-fused shells in the first week alone. German defensive positions carefully prepared over months proved completely vulnerable to airburst attack. The Wehrmacht issued increasingly desperate directives, attempting to counter proximity fuses. February 10th, orders required all units will construct foxholes minimum 2.5 meters deep, with overhead cover of logs, 30 centimeter diameter, covered with 50 centimeter of earth. February 18th revisions mandated movement in areas under artillery threat only through covered trenches. All positions must have concrete or steel overhead protection. These measures were physically impossible under combat conditions. Materials and time required for such construction simply didn't exist on battlefields. February 26th. Directives simply stated units will disperse to maximum distance combat effectiveness permits. No more than 2 men in any position. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, captured March 7, 1945, illustrated both power and limitations of proximity fuses. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann requested artillery support with VT fuses to slow German retreat across the bridge. The artillery commander refused, citing reports that U.S. troops were too close. This documented refusal, found in official U.S. Army histories, showed that proximity fuses required careful tactical employment to avoid friendly casualties. The technology was so effective, it endangered American forces when used carelessly. German attempts to develop their own proximity fuses revealed the true industrial gap between combatants. Rheinmetall resumed research in 1944. They actually test-fired several hundred working prototypes before war's end. But prototypes weren't production models. German engineers calculated they would need to build 15 new electronics factories, train 50,000 specialized workers, develop manufacturing processes that didn't exist in Germany. They would need 500 tons of refined copper monthly, 50 tons of silver for electrical contacts, 2 million precision vacuum tubes, 100,000 skilled workers just to approach American production rates. Even if materials existed, German industry lacked precision machine tools required. American factories used Swiss-made micrometers, accurate to 1/10,000th of an inch. Germany's best machine tools, worn from 5 years of continuous operation, achieved 1,000th inch accuracy on good days. Quality control requirements alone exceeded German capabilities completely. The deeper irony was that German scientists understood the theory perfectly. They had actually begun proximity fuse research before Americans started. But understanding theory and achieving mass production were entirely different challenges. America had not just developed superior technology. They created an industrial ecosystem capable of producing it in millions. While proximity fuses transformed ground warfare in Europe, their original purpose, anti-aircraft defense, reached peak effectiveness in the Pacific theater. By 1945, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells destroyed Japanese aircraft with unprecedented efficiency. The kamikaze threat, which might have made invasion of Japan catastrophically costly, was largely neutralized by VT fuses. Ships using proximity fuses during Okinawa campaign shot down 91 Japanese aircraft for every 100 attacking. This compared to 25 per 100 before proximity fuses. Admiral Willis Lee stated proximity fuses saved 100,000 American lives in the Pacific. Every Japanese plane shot down by VT fuses was one that didn't crash into our ships. This dual application, devastating against ground forces in Europe, decisive against aircraft in the Pacific, demonstrated American industrial philosophy. Mass-produced excellence deployed everywhere simultaneously. Germany, struggling to produce basic ammunition, faced an enemy that put sophisticated electronics in disposable shells. Military researchers studying proximity fuse effectiveness found they were 3 to 10 times more lethal than conventional artillery against ground targets. Against V-1 flying bombs, destruction rates increased from 24% to 79%. In naval anti-aircraft use, average rounds per kill dropped from over 1,000 to approximately 300. The 50-fold increase in lethal fragment area fundamentally changed artillery employment doctrine. Traditional artillery required concentrated barrages to achieve area coverage. Proximity fuses allowed dispersed fire to achieve similar effects with fewer shells. This improved logistics, reduced barrel wear, and allowed artillery to support more units simultaneously. General Patton reported that proximity fuses allowed his artillery to support advancing units more effectively. Instead of lengthy preparatory bombardments, artillery could fire shorter, more lethal concentrations. This allowed infantry to advance before enemies recovered. This increased operational tempo contributed to rapid Allied advances in 1945. However, casualty figures require careful analysis. While various estimates circulated during and after the war, no documented evidence supports claims of specific large numbers like 250,000 German deaths from proximity fuses alone. What is documented is their multiplication of artillery effectiveness and their devastating psychological impact on German forces. German recognition of proximity-fused technology came gradually and incompletely. Prisoner interrogations revealed that most German soldiers never understood what was killing them. They spoke of tree bursts and air mines, but didn't grasp the systematic nature of the technology destroying their positions. German technical intelligence eventually recognized the sophistication involved. Captured German reports from March 1945 acknowledged American proximity fuse represents 5 years' advancement in electronics miniaturization. Replication would require complete retooling of electronics industry. New materials currently unavailable. Minimum 18-month development timeline. Recommendation impossible under current conditions. The German military's final situation report, dated May 7, 1945, stated American artillery employing proximity detonation has inflicted casualties exceeding all other weapon systems combined since December 1944. Countermeasures have proven completely ineffective. Recommend immediate cessation of hostilities to preserve remaining forces from annihilation by superior technology. The proximity fuse program represented approximately 3% of all American physicists working on a single weapons project. This concentration of scientific talent combined with industrial capacity created production statistics that defied German comprehension. Each production line at Crosley Corporation could assemble 500 units per hour. Workers performed individual operations in seconds with microscopic precision thousands of times per shift. The facilities operated 24 hours daily, 7 days a week. Christmas Day, 1944, saw no production decrease whatsoever. While German soldiers died under proximity-fused bombardments in the Ardennes, American workers maintained maximum output levels. The supply chain stretched across America completely. Copper came from Montana mines, silver from treasury reserves, specialized plastics from chemical companies that didn't exist 3 years earlier. The industrial mobilization required was as complex as the technology itself. By contrast, German ammunition production in 1945 relied heavily on slave labor. They produced shells with 60% acceptable quality rates. Sabotage by forced workers reduced effective output further. By March 1945, only 30% of German artillery shells functioned properly. American VT fuses achieved 94% reliability, despite their sophisticated electronics. The proximity fuse story encompasses more than technology and production statistics. It fundamentally changed battlefield experience for infantry on both sides. American soldiers gained confidence, knowing their artillery could effectively suppress dug-in enemies. German soldiers lost psychological security that earth and entrenchments had provided for centuries. Veterans' accounts from both sides confirm this complete transformation. American forward observers described calling in fire missions with new confidence. They knew proximity fuses would affect enemies even in prepared positions. German veterans recalled the helplessness of hearing incoming artillery and knowing that taking cover offered no protection whatsoever. The medical implications were absolutely significant. Proximity-fused casualties presented unique challenges. The downward angle of fragments created wound patterns military surgeons hadn't encountered before. German medical services, already strained, couldn't adapt to these new casualty patterns. American medical personnel, by contrast, had penicillin and plasma. Advantages that had nothing to do with proximity fuses but compounded their effectiveness. The proximity fuse represented more than tactical advantage. It demonstrated systemic superiority in connecting science, industry, and military application effectively. While Germany pursued wonder weapons like V-2 rockets that consumed enormous resources for minimal military effect, America mass produced genuinely revolutionary technology and deployed it widely. The German V-2 program cost approximately $2 billion in equivalent resources and killed approximately 9,000 people. The proximity fuse program cost half as much and transformed both ground and anti-aircraft warfare completely. This comparison illustrates different approaches to military technology development. German emphasis on revolutionary platforms versus American focus on evolutionary improvements manufactured at massive scale. The proximity fuse also validated American organizational methods completely. Cooperation between Johns Hopkins scientists, industrial manufacturers, and military end users created development cycles that moved from concept to mass production in less than 3 years. Germany's fragmented research efforts and inter-service rivalries prevented similar achievement. After Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams studied German proximity fuse research extensively. They found sophisticated theoretical work, but no path to production. German scientists understood principles, but couldn't overcome manufacturing challenges. Rheinmetall prototypes discovered in 1945 were technically sound, but used conventional vacuum tubes that couldn't survive artillery acceleration. German engineers had tried various hardening techniques but never achieved reliability of American designs, even if they had. Germany lacked industrial capacity for mass production. Soviet forces received limited proximity fuse supplies through Lend-Lease, but no technical documentation. Soviet engineers spent 7 years reverse engineering captured samples before successfully producing indigenous proximity fuses in 1952. Even then, quality remained inferior to American wartime production. This technological transfer pattern revealed complexity of proximity fuse manufacturing. Having examples wasn't enough. Successful production required industrial infrastructure, quality control systems, and manufacturing expertise that took years to develop. The proximity fuse story offers enduring lessons about military innovation. First, evolutionary improvements to existing systems can be more decisive than revolutionary new weapons. Proximity fuses were still artillery shells, but they transformed artillery effectiveness completely. Second, mass production capability matters as much as technological sophistication. Germany developed jet aircraft ballistic missiles and advanced submarines, but couldn't manufacture them in decisive quantities. America produced millions of proximity fuses. Each one a sophisticated electronic device treated as expendable ammunition. Third, industrial integration determines military capability. Proximity fuses required coordinated effort from scientists, engineers, manufacturers, and military users. American organizational culture facilitated this integration. German institutional rivalries prevented it. Finally, secrecy has operational value, but also costs. Restricting proximity fuse use until December 1944 preserved tactical surprise, but meant months of additional Allied casualties that might have been prevented. The balance between security and operational advantage remains a challenge in modern military technology. Proximity fuses raise complex moral questions about technological warfare. They made killing more efficient, more certain, more mathematically precise. German soldiers in foxholes had no defense against shells detonating overhead at precisely calculated heights. This wasn't combat in any traditional sense. It was industrial slaughter. Yet proximity fuses also shortened the war. Every German division destroyed by proximity-fused artillery was one less defending concentration camps. Technology that efficiently killed German soldiers also hastened liberation of Nazi victims. Admiral Louis Strauss, who ranked proximity fuses among developments upon which victory very largely depended, understood this moral complexity. American veterans wrestled with these implications. They were grateful for technology that saved American lives, but troubled by its devastating effectiveness. Accounts described finding German positions where every soldier died simultaneously from airburst fragments. Efficient killing that removed human agency from death. The proximity fuse ultimately represented American advantages that transcended any single weapon. It demonstrated industrial capacity that could mass-produce sophistication, scientific capability that could solve complex problems quickly, organizational ability to coordinate development and production. When German infantry faced proximity-fused artillery in December 1944, they confronted more than a new weapon. They faced physical manifestation of American industrial democracy. the system that could conceive, develop, manufacture, and deploy revolutionary technology while simultaneously fighting a global war. The 30 feet between shell detonation and ground impact represented the gap between American capability and German assumptions. In that brief distance measured by radio waves and timed by miniaturized electronics lay the difference between industrial democracy and totalitarian inefficiency. The proximity fuse transformed more than World War II. It initiated the age of smart weapons. Modern precision-guided munitions trace their lineage to miniaturized electronics, first deployed in proximity fuses. The concept of putting intelligence into ammunition, revolutionary in 1944, is now standard military practice. Manufacturing techniques developed for proximity fuses influenced post-war electronics production. Quality control standards, clean room procedures, and precision assembly methods became foundations for the semiconductor industry. Women who assembled proximity fuses in 1944 pioneered techniques still used in electronics manufacturing. Organizational lessons proved equally enduring. Integration of academic research, industrial production, and military application became the model for Cold War weapons development. The proximity fuse program demonstrated that democratic societies could mobilize technology as effectively as totalitarian states. Perhaps more so. This account relies on verified historical sources and documented evidence. Production figures come from Bureau of Ordnance records. Technical specifications derived from declassified Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory documents. Battle accounts are drawn from official after-action reports and military histories. Claims lacking documentation have been excluded. No evidence supports specific casualty figures sometimes attributed to proximity fuses. German jamming attempts remain unverified. Some frequently repeated accounts appear to be composite narratives rather than documented events. What remains after careful verification is still remarkable. The proximity fuse was genuinely revolutionary, transforming artillery from area weapon to precision system. Its development and mass production demonstrated American industrial supremacy. Its employment hastened Allied victory. At 30 feet altitude, democracy defeated fascism. Not through superior ideology alone, though America possessed moral advantage, but through mundane excellence of mass production. The proximity fuse miniaturized electronics in an artillery shell represented everything Nazi Germany had miscalculated about American democracy. Where Germany saw weakness in diversity, America found strength in mobilization. Jewish scientists who fled Nazi persecution contributed to proximity fuse development. Women who couldn't serve in combat assembled weapons that killed German soldiers. Democratic inefficiency somehow produced 22 million sophisticated electronic devices, while totalitarian efficiency couldn't manufacture basic ammunition reliably. German infantry who faced proximity fuses in December 1944 were arguably the world's finest soldiers. They had conquered most of Europe, fought on multiple fronts, survived years of combat. They died in their foxholes not from lack of courage, but from encountering the future. They had 30 feet, the distance from air burst to impact. To recognize that everything they believed about American weakness was wrong. In those fractions of seconds, as fragments traveled from electronic detonation to human flesh, the Third Reich's delusions met American reality. The proximity fuse killed more than German soldiers. It killed mythology of martial superiority, the romance of defensive fortification, the concept that courage could overcome technology. In 30 feet of altitude measured by miniature radios using technology that shouldn't have existed, produced in quantities that shouldn't have been achievable. America announced that future warfare belonged to those who could imagine it, engineer it, and mass-produce it. Every German soldier who died under proximity, fused airburst, died from American industrial philosophy made manifest. Not in ideology, but in engineering. Not in propaganda, but in production. Not in theory, but in terminal ballistics. The shells that exploded 30 feet above German foxholes delivered democracy's argument against fascism in fragments. They proved that free societies could outproduce, out-innovate, and ultimately outfight totalitarian powers. The proximity fuse was ultimately democracy's perfect weapon. Sophisticated yet mass-produced. Complex yet reliable. Expensive yet expendable. It killed efficiently not through hatred, but through engineering excellence. It ended battles not through barbarism, but through mathematics. It won wars not through cruelty, but through industrial capability. The story of German infantry facing proximity fuses is fundamentally about collision between past and future. Traditional defensive techniques perfected over centuries became obsolete in minutes. The earth that had protected soldiers since warfare began could no longer shelter them. The proximity fuse didn't just kill German soldiers, it killed an entire conception of warfare. In December 1944, German infantry had 30 feet before proximity-fused airbursts shredded their foxholes. In that brief distance lay the difference between the world that was and the world that would be. They measured their graves in meters. America measured victory in megahertz. The future had arrived. It was mass-produced, and it exploded at exactly 30 feet.